Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum everyone. I'm a member of CPS International and bring to you the message of the Quran and Hadith in these short sessions. The contents of the talk are based on the understanding of Islam as presented in CPS literature. Islam, being a revealed religion, should be understood from its original scriptures, which consists of Quran, the word of God, and the teachings and life of the Prophet. The topic that we shall discuss today is the Islamic concept of spirituality. Before we begin, allow me to read a passage from Time magazine, August 7th, 2017. There are many protective qualities of religious belief and spirituality. So experts think that believing in a religion gives you a greater sense of purpose and meaning in life than a secular viewpoint alone does, and that can help carry you through the low periods and elevate the higher ones. It could be that belief in an afterlife makes you happier in this one, knowing that you are headed for something better. According to a BBC January 3rd, 2021 report, just as the anxieties of 2020 have led many to search for greater meaning in their lives, the pandemic has made it easier for people to explore their spirituality. It is now clear that spirituality plays a positive, constructive, supportive, and healing role in our lives. Let's study this topic in detail today. We shall emphasize upon how Islam explains spirituality. The definition of spirituality given in the dictionary is the quality of being connected with religion or the human spirit. A spiritual person is described as one who is connected with the human spirit rather than the body of physical things. This definition does not include the purpose of becoming spiritual. In other words, this definition does not say why a person would attach more importance to spirit than the physical things. This definition becomes complete when we add the purpose of becoming spiritual. According to the teachings of Islam, spirituality is the ability to convert material events into spiritual lessons. It is for the sake of a higher goal, and that goal is to develop a spiritual way of life. There is nothing mysterious about spirituality in Islam. It is the direct result of the kind of intellectual development that takes place when a believer ponders over the Creator and His creation. In this process, he gains something that may be termed spirituality. Therefore, the source of Islamic spirituality is reflection and deep thinking rather than any sort of mysterious exercise. There is no monasticism in Islam. The Quran says, "We did not prescribe monasticism for them. That was their own innovation by which they sought to please God. But then they did not observe it in the way that it should have been observed." So says verse 27 from chapter 57. From the Quran, we learn that in the very creation of the universe, the signs of God lie hidden all around us. A person who is in a state of keen awareness, when he reflects upon the things of the world, comes to see the Creator in the creation. The meaning of the creation of the universe is laid bare before him. Ultimately, the universe becomes a permanent source of spiritual inspiration. He is continuously nourished by it during his worldly experience, and his observation of the universe awakens in him latent divine qualities. This observation and contemplation of the universe does not result in his shunning normal life. Far from withdrawing from the world, he lives in it participating in all its activities, yet despite his involvement remaining aloof. That is to say, although he fulfills all his duties and responsibilities, his heart is not attached to worldly affairs. He appears to live in the world, but he stands apart from it. Thanks to this state of his heart, he acquires tremendous spiritual gains. The Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, says of such individuals, God plants wisdom in the heart of one who shows disinclination for the world. It is important to note that the concept of spirituality in Islam is based on the principle of God realization. God is the treasure house of all virtues. And when man's contact with God is established in the world of his feelings, at the psychological level, an unseen inner revolution is brought about, which is called spirituality. In this matter, the relationship between God and man can be likened to an electric wire and the powerhouse. When the wire is connected to the powerhouse, electricity is produced and the place is lit up. In this way, spirituality is the result of the connection to the powerhouse of God. Human nature is like an inflammable element. When an inflammable substance like petrol comes near a fire, it's ignited. Similarly, human nature is awakened when it comes in contact with God. This finds expression in the Quran in these words. God is the light of the heavens and the earth. His light may be compared to a niche containing a lamp. The lamp inside a crystal of star-like brilliance lit from a blessed olive tree, neither of the east nor of the west. The luminous oil is as if ready to burn without even touching it. Light upon light, God guides to his light whom he will. God draws such comparisons for mankind. God has full knowledge of everything. Chapter 24, verse 35. This is a compound simile. Light here means the guidance of Almighty, niche means the human heart, and lamp denotes the capability to receive divine inspiration. Glass and oil elaborate upon this receptivity. Glass shows that this receptivity has been lodged in the human heart, protected from outside influences, and clear oil indicates that this receptivity is very strong and is eagerly waiting to receive inspiration. This verse makes it clear that, on the one hand, God is the source of inspiration, and on the other, the consciousness of spirituality, which is called God consciousness, is inbuilt in human nature. In this way, when these two things come together, Islamic spirituality comes into existence. This is indeed another name for the awakening of God consciousness. When it reaches its highest stage, the believer's realization of God comes to that point where he begins to feel consciously in his worship that he is seeing God, and if he is unable to come to this stage, then he consciously feels that God is seeing him. If the first type of experience is called direct spiritual experience, the second type may be termed indirect spiritual experience. The Quran tells us, prostrate yourself and come closer to God. Chapter 96, verse 19. For God is always close to us, closer than a jugular vein. Chapter 50, verse 16. By total surrender to God, the soul can realize nearness to God. These spiritual experiences cannot be explained in words. Everything in the universe seems to convey a divine message. The leaves of the tree become a thrilling experience. A waft of air gives a message of truth. Divine music can be heard in the bubbling of the river and the chirping of the birds. Due to this high state of receptivity, He is enabled, in the words of the Prophet, to see with God's eye, to speak with God's tongue, to walk with God's foot, to hear with the ear of God. Then all limitations vanish and his days and nights are spent in God's neighborhood. All this can be felt, not described in words. This can be explained with the example of a child who has limitless love for his mother. He knows it himself in the full sense, but he cannot fully describe it in words. The same is true of spirituality. When a person is linked with the source of spirituality, he undergoes such spiritual experiences as he himself fully understands, but has difficulty in conveying to others. He may describe some external signs, but he cannot describe the inner reality. The Quran attaches great importance to contemplation, reflection, and serious thought. There are a number of verses in the Quran that indicate that innumerable signs of God are scattered in the heavens and the earth. The observance of God's signs is the greatest source of spirituality. According to a hadith, worship God as if you are seeing Him. When man engages in true devotion, he is linked with God at a sensory or psychological level. He comes close to God. Through an invisible cord, he comes in contact with God. God's light passes through him. His entire existence comes to be pervaded by this indescribable feeling, which is called spiritual experience. This is called Rabbaniyat, that is, being God-oriented in the Quran. The Quran says, "Be devoted servants of the Lord," chapter 3, verse 79. Rabbani personality or God-oriented personality means one whose thinking and whose actions are God-oriented, who has placed God at the center of his attention. When an individual attains spirituality, his state becomes like a lamp lit all of a sudden. He undergoes spiritual experiences. His heart becomes an ocean of spiritual waves. He appears to live in this world, but he has found another far superior world for himself. We have now seen what inner changes takes place in a person who becomes spiritual and what his state of mind is. Now we shall see what external changes are manifested in a spiritual person. In other words, we shall now see how the interactions of a spiritual person with others are. When it comes to interactions with people, he will render service to alleviate the sufferings of humankind. The following incident brings out the concept of service to others in a very profound way. During the British monarchy, one of the British emperors disguised himself as an ordinary person to inspect his military establishments. During an interaction, when one military officer admonished him in a very stern and harsh manner, the disguised king asked, "Do you know who I am?" Taken aback at such a question and doubting himself, the officer said, "Are you a military officer just as I am?" The king replied, "I am of a greater position than that." The officer said, "Then you must be a captain." Again to this the king replied, "I am greater than that." "Are you a colonel?" asked the officer. "No, I am greater than that," was the reply. The officer said, "Then you must be a general." "No, I am even greater than a general," said the king. Then the officer, who was by now in total shock, said, "Then you must be the emperor." He said, "Yes, I am the king." The officer handed his gun to the king and said, "You may shoot me for my crime. I have failed to recognize my king." The king said, "No, you're a good military officer, but I have an advice for you. Whenever you interact with any common man, think of him as your king and of yourself as an ordinary soldier. Then you will treat every individual in the best manner and will consider the common man's affairs as the affairs of the king." To understand this incident more clearly, the following hadith is very important. The Prophet said, on doomsday, God will say to a person, I was ill, but you did not come to nurse me. The man will reply, God, you being the Lord of the universe, how can you be ill? God will answer, such and such servant of mine was ill. Had you gone there, you would have found me there with him. Then God will say to another person, I was hungry, but you did not feed me. The person will reply, God, you are the Lord of the worlds. How could you go hungry? God says, such and such of my servants came to you, but you did not feed him. Had you done so, you would have found me with him. Then God will say to yet another man, I was thirsty and you did not give me water to drink. That person will also say, God, you are the Lord of the worlds. How could you be thirsty? God says, such and such servant of mine came to you, but you did not give him water to drink. Had you offered him water, you would have found me there with him. In this hadith, the teaching is that we should consider every interaction with others as an interaction with God. The words used in the hadith are symbolic, and this hadith guides us towards the character of a believer. A person who treats every human interaction as an interaction with God will not commit any excesses in his behavior. The Islamic principle highlighted here is that if a person wants to find God, he shall first have to make himself deserving of this by serving others. This paves the way to spiritual progress. Only those who have elevated themselves spiritually will find God. An important aspect with human interactions is of gratitude to people. Therefore, spirituality and gratitude have a definite connection. Let's explore this in the following discussion. If we realize the unseen God in the sense just described, then it is impossible that we'll be ungrateful to our fellow beings, as we are all interdependent to live our life on earth. With this understanding, we'll now move on to the aspect of gratitude which highlights this point with more clarity. The Prophet Muhammad has said that one who does not express his gratitude to other human beings will never be thankful to God. Thankfulness is a state of mind which cannot be compartmentalized. If it manifests itself in one place, the chances are that it will do so in other places too. If a man shows gratitude to one person, he will surely show it to others likewise. When a man does someone a good turn, it is something quite obvious, a tangible, direct experience. On the contrary, God's kindness, being an indirect experience, is not at all obvious. One has to be perceptive and reflective to be able to realize the favors granted to man by God. While the favors a man does are observable, God's favors can be realized only by thinking about them. One who fails to perceive an event which is directly observable cannot be expected to grasp something which can be apprehended only after a great deal of cogitation. If the recipient of a favor fails to acknowledge it for fear of belittling himself in the eyes of his benefactor, he does himself nothing but harm. It is more a question of being belittled in the eyes of his conscience than falling down in others' eyes. This is, of course, by far the more injurious. An even greater disadvantage of an ungrateful attitude is that it produces a mentality of non-acknowledgement. Failing at first to acknowledge the favors of one's fellow human beings leads one to more grave error. He fails to give wholehearted credence to the Lord of the universe. There is no greater loss in this world than one who has failed to acknowledge his Creator. Thus, Islam inculcates the spirit of gratitude towards one's fellow beings and towards God. A person who is not spiritual will live in a culture of complaint. He will develop the eye to see only the faults of people. He will have expectations from others to do things his way, and as such, he will not be able to see what he has received from them. True spirituality is the elevation of the human condition to a plane on which the mind is focused on the higher, non-material realities of a divine existence. The sign of a person being spiritual for sure is that he will contribute positively towards humanity. He will be compassionate, kind to the animals as well, and he will not harm the environment. He will be self-motivated in doing this. A non-spiritual person will always complain about material things of the world. He will be materialistic. To understand what constitutes materialism, imagine that you come across a palatial house or see an attractive car being driven along the street. If a strong desire is kindled within you to have such things in your possession, that is a clear indication that materialism is a major motivating factor in your life. One who sees the same things but remains unaffected by the notions of luxury that they convey and therefore feels no desire to acquire them, lives in a more elevated sphere in which materialism plays no part. He sees no attraction in the lesser world of material appearances. He'll be engrossed in the higher realities of the supremely spiritual life. The truly non-material person is never influenced by superficialities. Those who live for worldly pleasures believe that gratification cannot be had except from material things. But this thinking is due to sheer ignorance. Worldly pleasure being the only thing they have experienced, they imagine that for enjoyment they must depend solely on material things. Had they experienced spiritual pleasure, they would certainly have forgotten material pleasure. The pleasure to be derived from material things is limited in nature and very short-lived, whereas spiritual pleasure can be eternally savored. The materialistic person can find pleasure only from tangible objects, but the spiritual person lives on a higher plane. For such a person, even seeing things in another's possession occasions an outpouring of his heartfelt gratefulness to God. Another's material pleasure transforms itself into a spiritual pleasure for him as well. Furthermore, in the spiritual world, there is no difference between comfort and deprivation. The Quran talks about the source of real comfort in the following verse. It is only in the remembrance of God that hearts are comforted. Verse 28 from chapter 13. Here, comfort means not just the temporary solace to be found in everyday convenience. Here, the word comfort means the real comfort with its implications of peace of mind that can stem only from God Almighty. Man by nature is an idealistic creature. Anything short of ideal can attract only fitful attention from him, whereas true and lasting comfort can be achieved only through the remembrance of the perfect being, God. Materialism is a form of shallowness. It is to live a life of limitations, whereas spirituality is to live in limitlessness. To summarize, we have seen the Islamic concept of spirituality under three headings. First is based on the principle of God realization. Second is the principle of interaction with human beings. And the third one is in relation to the material things of the world, stressing upon a need-based life, not a greed-based life. With this talk today, we have completed the first series of talks. This series covered 20 topics. The focus of this series was an academic discussion on various fundamental Islamic subjects. This is now time to announce a new series of talks which will be interactive. The planning of this new series demands some time. Therefore, for the next few weeks, we will not have these sessions. God willing, we will inform you as and when the new series begins. Kindly log on to our websites and Facebook, which are a storehouse of Maulana Waiduddin Khan Saab's enriching videos, audios. We have our Sunday classes by Dr. Farida Khanum, talks by the Islamic scholars and other members of the CPS mission. Thank you for your precious time and interest. May God in His infinite mercies guide all of us towards all that is good for our life in this world and in the life hereafter. The last of our call will be, Glory be to God, the Lord of the universe.